Department of Technology, Office of Broadband and Digital Literacy. And I welcome everyone to our very first Digital Literacy and Inclusion Outcome Area Working Group. So just a few additional housekeeping items, if we can go to the next slide, please. So we do have ASL interpreters. If that is a function that you need, please make sure that you have the side-by-side speaker view enabled. We also have closed captioning available, and we have chat enabled. So I would really encourage everybody, please put your names, your organizations, where you're joining us from into the chat. It will help us just get an idea of who we have participating today and joining us. And then once we get to the later portion where we're having the discussion of some of the topics, please use the raise your hand feature on Zoom, and that way we can kind of track who's raising their hand so that we can call on you and kind of get the conversation going with everyone. So next slide, please. Okay, so our agenda today is we'll be kind of going over the digital equity planning process. We have some guest speakers here today to talk a little bit about what is digital equity and why it's important. This is also going to be a question for you guys. And then we will also have a discussion, roundtable forum, whatever you want to call it today, about community and lived experiences, where we're really hoping to have conversation and hear from you. And then we're going to have some calls to action and activities that you can take to help participate and broaden and encourage participation in the statewide digital equity planning. And then we'll talk about the next steps. So with that, I'm going to go to the next slide. And I'm going to hand it over to Scott Adams, who's the Deputy Director here of Broadband and Digital Literacy at the California Department of Technology, and Rob Osborne, who is the Director of the Communications Division at the California Public Utilities Commission. So passing it over to you, Scott and Rob.
Oh, thank you, Laura, and good morning, everyone. It's so great to be here with you all today. Really at the kickoff of the Digital Literacy and Inclusion Outcome Area Working Group that is really intended to bring together community partners from across the state of California to help provide inputs that will inform both the state's digital equity plan and then how we allocate future digital equity capacity dollars. Laura, next slide, please. So really what we wanted to do is just center this. We know that digital equity is of such importance to folks here and actually millions of California residents. Wanted to kind of frame that Broadband for All is the state's overarching program to close the digital divide throughout the state of California and foster digital equity. And the Broadband for All program really acknowledges that access, affordability, and adoption are critical to digital equity, and that digital literacy and inclusion are really primary focus of this current inquiry and the focus of this working group. Next slide. And again, wanted to kind of frame the historic evolution of Broadband for All in the state of California that really began the coordination at the statewide level with the creation of the California Broadband Council in 2010. The California Broadband Council is now a 12-member body. It's 9 state agencies, including the Department of Technology and the Public Utilities Commission, the state libraries, the Department of Education. It does include the California Emerging Technology Fund, and then representatives from the Senate and Assembly. And historically, their work had been to coordinate broadband deployment and adoption efforts in the state in un- and unserved communities, as determined by the California Public Utilities Commission. I think, as we all know, that the pandemic shone a brighter light on the state's persistent digital divide. So an important framing of our work was Governor Newsom's broadband executive order that came out in 2020. And one of the primary actions that was given to the Broadband Council was to develop a statewide broadband action plan to really, outline the steps needed to close the state's digital divide. That action plan was developed in just under 4 months during the pandemic with input from over 700 different entities, many of you among them that really, set a path forward. The next key piece was in 2021 with the historic passage of Senate Bill 156, the legislature and the governor established a framework and funding to really address some of the infrastructure and access needs that, in the state here. So $3.25 billion was allocated to the California Department of Technology to work and develop an open access middle mile network throughout the state. The Department of Technology is working with Golden State Net, who is our third-party administrator, and Caltrans is really managing the construction and development of that network along the state highway system. Similarly, over $2 billion was allocated to the Public Utilities Commission. In addition to the programs that they run through the California Advanced Service Fund to establish additional last mile grant programs to enable internet service providers and other eligible entities to leverage those grants to develop last mile services and networks that could tie back to the middle mile. And then you see at the bottom of the chart here, through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, in 2022, the federal government allocated about $65 billion additional dollars for states and local entities to leverage to support broadband adoption and deployment. And we'll note that here in California, Assembly Bill 2750, which was passed by the legislature, directed the California Department of Technology to seek federal dollars to develop a state digital equity plan in consultation with the Public Utilities Commission and the California Broadband Council and the public. And so that's really what gave us the authority and impetus to develop this digital equity plan. Next slide, please. Just real quick on the planning Yes.
I'm so sorry. We're going to have Rob just talk a little bit about the programs that CPUC has after the previous slide. Thank you. Rob, are you able to unmute? There we go.
Yeah, sorry about that. Thank you. So, and sorry, I'm interrupting your flow, Scott, but just a couple things about what we're doing at the PUC with regard to digital equity. So if you're not aware, we have a program called the California Advanced Services Fund, and it has a number of sub-accounts. The biggest one is the infrastructure sub-account, but we also have a public housing sub-account that has been supporting 341 projects connecting over 22,000 housing units across 31 counties. This basically provides funding to provide free service to people living in public housing. In addition, that sub-account has also funded digital literacy training to 128 project locations with over 28,000 residents in total. In addition to that, we also have an adoption account that supported 281 digital inclusion and broadband access projects serving over 266,000 participants in 38 counties. So there's a lot of activity underway. These grant programs are also continuing to accept applications. And then I'll dig into the BEAD a little bit later. So I'll hand it back to you, Scott.
Thanks, Rob. And thank you, Laura, for having me pause to bring Rob in there. So real quick, wanted to go over just the planning process that the Department of Technology is working on very closely with the Public Utilities Commission and all of you. It really consists of 5 components to allow both the state and our partners to get the best data information about what is currently going on and to identify needs and then to make an informed plan. So we have established a statewide planning group that consists of the member entities of the California Broadband Council and extended that out to 12 other entities that are mostly state agencies that have a connection to the 8 covered populations and subject matter expertise that's necessary for the plan. We've established these outcome area working groups, which we'll go into on the next slide. Have a number of surveys that we'll be using to gather data and information from individual residents, but also critical organizations at the state, regional, and local level. Knowing that Zoom is a great way to convene people, there's tremendous value in meeting in person. So we are committed to doing at least 20 regional and local engagement events across the state and, every economic and consortia region, so that we can get together with you all in your communities where you live and where you're impacted the most, and hear from you all and members of the public there. And then lastly, a number of ongoing statewide public engagements that can both be tracked on the Broadband for All portal. We will be communicating out monthly via our email, update, and establish other ad hoc meetings as necessary. Next slide. So again, digital equity, it's all about equity. And we know that, there are barriers to digital equity that impact outcomes, that are critical to individual residents and the state. And so we've established 6 outcome area working groups. The first on education, which we met with yesterday. The second is health. The third, this one, is digital literacy and inclusion. The fourth, essential services, accessibility and civic engagement. The fifth, workforce and economic development. And then the sixth, tribal collaboration. Want to stress that you're all encouraged to participate in any of the working groups that you would like, because we know that there's a lot of interdependence and intersectionality amongst these different outcome areas. Next slide, please. So really important that the Digital Equity Act, which the NTIA digital equity planning programs direct states to prioritize investments for 8 covered populations. We have them here, and really all of our work is going to be viewed through the lens of both understanding and hearing from the challenges that these folks face. So it's individuals living in covered households, aging individuals, incarcerated individuals, veterans, individuals with disabilities, those with language barriers, members of racial or ethnic minority groups, or folks in rural areas. Next slide. And so here, the focus of this group, this is the kickoff. We intend to have 3 more working groups here, is to convene subject matter experts and practitioners, bring them together to develop strategies that align with digital equity priorities. And the objectives over the next several months is for all of us collectively, as a broad community here in California invested in digital equity, is to develop a statewide stakeholder map for each outcome area, conduct an asset inventory of existing programs and plans and services to support digital equity, to promote and encourage participation in the statewide digital equity survey and other survey data gathering tools that we will create, conduct a gap analysis for each outcome area, and then really at the end of it all to develop recommendations to CDT for potential inclusion in the digital equity plan. And Laura, I think that is, yep, that is the end of my presentation. Thank you all. Looking forward to the rest of the meeting.
Thank you, Scott. And Rob, I know you were going to talk just a little bit about how there is, Scott covered the planning components and just kind of how the planning with digital equity, and if we can go back one slide, thank you. The planning with digital equity has an intersection with the planning with BEAD.
Yeah, thank you, Laura. And just to build off of what Scott was saying, so let me start from the beginning. What is BEAD? It stands for the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program. It's a $42.4 billion grant-making program administered by the Department of Commerce's National Telecommunications and Information Administration. We call it NTIA. This is part of the greater IIJA package that was passed by Congress and signed by the president. And basically what happens is each state will get an allocation for BEAD to administer last mile program funding for broadband. And in states where there's excess funding than there is need, that money can then be used for other activities. However, for California, our estimates are that we will have less money than we need to close the digital divide. So based on that, we're working very closely with Department of Technology in integrating all the digital equity pieces into the BEAD program. And so what actually does that mean? Well, digital equity in BEAD means it's really the condition in which individuals and communities have the information technology capacity that is needed for full participation in society and the economy. So it's really kind of, to restate, it's really broadband for all. Equity in broadband infrastructure deployment is a key component. And as Assistant Secretary Alan Davidson says from the NTIA, that BEAD without equity, so if you take the E out of BEAD, is bad. That's a good catchphrase to think about. Equity is a core component of the BEAD program. So in terms of touch points, and we may get into this later with regard to the BEAD program, we're really looking to engage with communities that have traditionally not been engaged in broadband, and that's going to be through a series of engagements, public engagements that we're working with CDT to plan. But specifically, we'll be socializing a draft version of a 5-year plan, an action plan that we have to submit to the NTIA, basically outlining how we plan to administer the BEAD program in California. And that has to be done through collaboration with local, regional, and tribal entities, as well as unions and worker organizations. And in that 5-year action plan, we have to identify digital equity and inclusion needs, goals, and implementation strategies, including ways in which the state plans to utilize the BEAD funding. So that's one component, one touch point, I think, with stakeholders in the public. The other one is the BEAD rulemaking, and this is where we're the commission, the Public Utilities Commission, will be opening a rulemaking to set up the rules for the BEAD subgrantee program. We're expecting to have that put that up for vote this coming next week, actually. So I'm going to stop there before I flood you with too much information. But thanks for letting me put in that little plug for the BEAD program.
Thank you so much, Rod. Really appreciate it. Great. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next section. And this is something Rob talked a little bit about this when he just talked about the definition of digital equity. So what we're going to talk about now is what is digital equity and why is it important? So we do have some guest speakers here today, but what I'm going to do is I'm also going to challenge you in the chat to answer those two questions. What does it mean to you? And the reason I'm issuing the challenge is because we had the Education Outcome Area Working Group yesterday, and we had a lot of discussion about what it meant in the chat. So please feel free as we go through this to answer those questions, whatever it means to you. What is digital equity? Why is it important? And while we're doing that, I do want to introduce Gladys Papalotek from the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, our federal partner, Amanda Bergson-Shilcock from the National Skills Coalition, and Sunny Wright McPeak from the California Emerging Technology Fund. So they will all be talking a little bit about what this means to them. So I'm going to hand it over to Gladys to kick this off.
Thank you so much, Laura. And thank you, Scott and Rob, for those are just great introductions on the program side from both the federal perspective and in the state. So let me get started. Good morning, everybody. My name is Gladys Papalotek. I am one of 2 federal program officers or state leads for California from NTIA, again, the National Telecommunications and Information Administration. Thank you to the CDT team for inviting us to participate today, and particularly, again, Scott and Rob for all the good work they've been doing with their teams. It's been really amazing to watch that evolve and grow, and we look forward to continued partnerships with them. It's also great to see today so many longtime partners and so many new folks in this space. So I'm really excited that ecosystem in California is growing and continues to grow. My focus today is to share the definition of digital equity, some of which that both Rob and Scott have already mentioned, and objectives of the planning process and how it will factor into the state capacity grants for NTIA. For the Digital Equity Act programs, digital equity is defined as the condition in which individuals and communities have the information technology capacity that is needed for full participation in society and the economy. Really, without it, already disadvantaged communities will continue to fall further into the gap. Digital inclusion enables or leads to digital equity. This means that the activities that are necessary to ensure that all individuals have access to and use of affordable information and communication technologies, such as reliable fixed and wireless broadband internet service, internet-enabled devices that meet the needs of the users, and applications and online content designed to enable and encourage self-sufficiency, participation, and collaboration. It must also include obtaining access to digital literacy training, the provision of quality technical support, and obtaining basic awareness of measures to ensure online privacy and cybersecurity. Digital equity is the goal, and digital inclusion is how we get there. As already mentioned, CDT was awarded a $4 million state planning grant for 1 year, beginning in December 2022 through November 2023. The planning process objective is to develop a state digital equity plan or build on the one that we already have as a foundation. The planning process requires engagement of major key stakeholders like yourselves and the public throughout the state. To solicit input and feedback from communities and sectors like yours to develop the state digital equity plan. As part of the bipartisan infrastructure law, the Digital Equity Act and BEAD program goal is to connect 100% of all Americans. So local and regional participation is a must, and all voices need to be heard to be successful. The state will need the help of each working group and engage your networks statewide. The planning process will factor into the next phase, the state capacity grant. Only entities who complete the planning grant program can apply, and the state digital equity plan is required to be eligible. The state capacity grant will be used to implement the state digital equity plans and promote digital inclusion. NTIA anticipates a NOFO or another notice of funding opportunity for the state capacity grants by the end of this year. By mid-2024, we anticipate that the 5-year state capacity implementation will have begun. That is the end of my presentation. Thank you so much, and we look forward to working with each of you. Please reach out to us if you would like more information, and our information will be provided. Thank you. Back to you, Laura.
Thank you, Gladys. Appreciate that. And also great job, everybody, with the discussion in the chat. Please keep it going. So just to reiterate, if on the next slide, these are the prompts. What does digital equity mean to you? Why is it important? And also keeping in mind those 8 covered populations that Scott was talking about earlier. So I'm going to hand it over to Amanda to talk about closing the digital skills divide. Amanda?
Thanks so much, Laura, and thanks to Scott and the team for the opportunity to speak with all of you today. I'm going to take the next 10 minutes to give you a preview of some new research that we've just released on the demand for digital skills. My guess is a lot of this information will feel affirming to you, reflecting the work that you're doing every day in communities. So we'll walk through the findings and I'll share a couple of implications. Next slide. The first and top line point to make, and I think all of us here on the call today are familiar with it already, is that the digital divide isn't just about broadband or hardware. It is very much also about skills. We want to make sure that people are equipped with the skills that let them do the things that they want to do with their families, in their jobs, in their educational pathways. Next slide. So let me tell you a little bit about the project that we undertook. National Skills Coalition is a 20-year-old nonprofit organization. We collaborated with the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta to analyze 43 million help wanted ads from 2021. Across all of those ads, employers were requesting thousands of different kinds of skills. Next slide. And so we coded those skills according to whether they were definitely, likely, or not digital. So for example, a definitely digital skill is something like Microsoft Excel, and a likely digital skill is something like bookkeeping, where you could do it with pen and paper, but most people these days use a computer. Next slide. We did look at California in particular compared to the national average, and you can see California highlighted in the orange bars here. California employers are more likely to require a definitely digital skill at 51% of all help wanted ads compared to 47% nationally. And California is about at the national level for job ads that require a likely digital skill, as you can see on the right-hand slide. Next slide. So we think about partners in the community, digital inclusion programs and advocates, as well as education and workforce programs play really important roles in helping people build digital skills. Next slide. I want to go through a handful of examples of what digital skills look like, just to help kind of ground us in the fact that it's not just folks who are software engineers or folks who are cybersecurity experts. So we see in the creative industry, the audio slide that you just saw, medical office receptionists before the pandemic might have checked people in person. Now they're often helping patients navigate telehealth. Next slide. Firefighters often use software to analyze and respond. I was surprised to find out recently that the U.S. Department of the Interior has tech skills for wildland firefighters, not a profession that I thought of as requiring a lot of digital skills, but these days it does. Next slide. Of course, ag is a huge industry in California, and we see that agricultural workers of all kinds need digital skills, including greenhouse workers who need to be able to understand sensors for the industrial Internet of Things, as well as folks who might be interacting with a John Deere tractor or combine harvester and needing to manage the onboard computer. Next slide. In the utility industry, of course, there's many kinds of software that are used, but particularly around maintenance is something that comes up over and over again for frontline utility workers. Next slide. So the kind of take home of the examples I've just been sharing with you is that even jobs that may be more entry level, so those that require relatively little work experience or education, still need digital skills. And so that emphasizes the importance of digital inclusion programs that may be working with folks who are newer to the workforce or are re-entering the workforce after an absence, perhaps having been a stay-at-home parent, taking care of an elder, or returning from incarceration. This slide here highlights that even jobs that require 0 to 2 years of experience require a great deal of digital skills. And in the next slide, you'll see that even jobs requiring a high school diploma or an associate's degree similarly require significant digital skills. Next slide. We also want to encourage folks, and those of you running digital inclusion programs on the ground probably see this every day, not to make assumptions about workers and learners' digital skills based on their age, right? We often hear, oh, this is a problem the retirement calendar is going to solve. Younger workers are all digital natives. Well, first of all, that's not fair to older workers, many of whom are pretty tech savvy. But second of all, that overlooks the fact that for many younger workers, they have fragmented knowledge. That means they're comfortable with some digital skills, but they're not comfortable with others. So they might be great at sending text messages or creating a TikTok video. That does not mean that they're necessarily comfortable using electronic medical record software or creating a spreadsheet. Next slide. So the important thing is to provide opportunities for people to build from the skills they have to the skills they need. This is a kind of complicated slide, but the take-home message in this slide is very simple. Everybody needs both foundational and industry-specific skills. Foundational skills are those baseline skills like, can you download an app and install it on your phone? Can you log into a website that requires two-factor authentication? Can you send a simple email? Industry-specific skills are things like electronic medical record software or some of those other industry examples I was sharing earlier. Next slide. We see overwhelmingly in the data from our study that jobs that require even one digital skill pay an average of 23% more than jobs that require no digital skills. And if I spread out this chart and I showed you the wages for jobs that require 3, 5, 7, or 9 different digital skills, you'd see that the hourly wage goes up with each new skill. And you might say to me, gosh, Amanda, how many jobs even have 9 different digital skills that are required? And the answer is 2.1 million jobs. It's a lot of jobs. Next slide. Of course, as folks earn more, they contribute more in federal and state tax revenue. And we've put some estimates on the slide here, depending on the household size. So whether it's might be a single parent or 2 adults, whatever that household composition might look like. Next slide. So we hear over and over again that businesses want workers with a strong base of foundational digital skills. So things like being able to do typing and data entry, use basic word processing software. But we also know that there's a demand for industry-specific skills. So next slide. I've highlighted here some that showed up over and over again in our California data. And my guess is some of these may not be a big surprise to you. But we certainly saw ERP or enterprise resource planning software and robotics show up over and over again in the manufacturing sector. Transportation and warehousing, logistics, a huge area of growth for California, of course, and a whole variety of different kinds of mobile apps and handheld scanners that warehouse workers and others need to be able to use. Next slide. So how can California digital inclusion advocates use these findings to ensure that federal investments pay off for workers and learners? Next slide. The first and the simplest is to make sure that the Digital Equity Act and BEAD funding is used to boost access to digital skills training. Broadband is crucial, devices are crucial, but people also need the skills to be able to use these things successfully. And that's often the biggest motivator, right? People don't wake up in the morning and say, I want to get good at using a Chromebook. They wake up and say, I want to be able to communicate with my grandchild. I want to get a job. I want to get a better job. I want to go back to school. So digital skills rather are a tool that can help people meet the aspirations and respond to the intrinsic motivation that they already have. Next slide. We're also recommending that the state digital equity plan take full advantage of the fact that the federal government allows funds to be used for basic, applied, and advanced digital skills training. In other words, helping people build those foundational and those industry-specific skills that I've just been talking about. Next slide. We encourage California to combine census data with these findings to help identify gaps in digital skill building opportunities. As you heard earlier in Scott's and the other remarks at the top of this presentation, there are 8 covered populations in the Digital Equity Act, including rural communities, veterans, folks with disabilities, folks who are incarcerated, folks who are people of color. And so as California is thinking about how best to help each of those populations build their digital skills, you can combine census data with this information to do that. Next slide. I've included a couple of slides at the end here with background about National Skills Coalition, so you know who we are. We are a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization. We do not accept public funds. We are foundation and donation funded, so we will not be applying for any Digital Equity Act or BEAD funding ourselves, but we make our research available to the field. I've also included my contact information in case anyone wants to follow up. Thanks so much for the opportunity to chat with all of you today, and I look forward to hearing and seeing your comments in the chat.
Thank you, Amanda. And I just wanted to say that, yes, there is a lot of conversation going on in the chat. Thank you all for the comments and thoughtful thoughtful feedback. So before we pivot to the community and lived experiences, I'd like to introduce Sunny Wright McPeak with the California Emerging Technology Fund. And Sunny, if you can just kind of round us out here on what is digital equity and why is it important?
Thank you, Laura. What a pleasure it is to join all of you with 90 plus leaders in this whole space of achieving digital equity. It's a great kickoff to this outcome area work group. The California Emerging Technology Fund is a statewide nonprofit organization that the California Public Utilities Commission directed to be established out of mergers, corporate consolidations in 2005. And we've operated for about 15 years. As I look at everybody who is in attendance today, there are all of you that have been our partners who have actually provided the foundation for the work of CETF, and that we continue to collaborate on attacking the digital divide, closing the digital divide, which is the problem, with digital inclusion, which is the process to achieve digital equity, which is the result. And so that's exactly how I heard Gladys Papalatic also talk about it with the lens from NTIA. So we've got a problem, challenge the digital divide. We incorporate digital inclusion into our work to achieve as the outcome or the result digital equity. And it's important because it's just another manifestation of the economic divide, the opportunity divide, and all of that is a combination of factors and forces that make it very, very difficult for communities of all disadvantages, usually primarily economic, to overcome. But that economic divide and the wealth gap is rooted in systemic racism. It's very important to understand the nature of the big challenge that all low-income households face in California and across the nation. Over the last 15 years, the California Emerging Technology Fund, working with all of you on this chat today in this meeting, or certainly most of you have had the experience of collectively training more than 1 million people with digital literacy, and also getting online more than 775,000 households, low-income households with affordable internet service. And that's been a big lift, but as we go forward in preparing the digital equity and BEAD plans, I think it's important to try to get a handle on the magnitude of our challenge, how to quantify it, and how to think about what works. We will have the benefit of surveys, as you heard Scott talk about. So there'll be another statewide digital equity scientific sample that is going to be conducted by phone in 4 languages. And a subset of that will be provided to everybody who can distribute it and participate online. We'll also have some paper versions if people want them in that form. The online version will be in 12 languages. So one of the first things that we're really going to ask of all of you is please distribute the online survey through your networks, because that'll give us a lot more information. We have some insights from data that is statewide. For example, in 2021, the last time a statewide survey was done, we know that statewide, that 91% of all households are online, but out of that, 6% are online only with a smartphone. And a smartphone's a marvelous device, but it isn't sufficient for many households, particularly if you are either trying to develop workforce skills or have children in school. You really need to have another kind of device. The second piece of insight is that we do know from 2021, although we'll get this data updated from in 2023, and this tracks with also the census data and what Pew charitable funds actually also have identified in their surveys. And that is that 18% of all low-income households are not online at all. The percentage who are not online increases if you don't speak English or have only a high school degree. So that is a very important understanding of the the magnitude of the gap. The digital divide is much more pronounced for individuals who are low income and don't speak English, people of color, and who have not had the opportunity to get higher education. We have recently, in working with the California Department of Technology and other state agencies under the umbrella of the California Broadband Council, worked with many of you to promote the Affordable Connectivity Program, ACP, which is also a benefit under the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. We have had the experience in working with you of coordinating 49 of the Get Connected California ACP enrollment events in August and in October. And from those individuals who attend and the surveys that they have completed, more extensive questionnaires if they were the beneficiary of a drawing for a device, for a computer, we see a demand for digital literacy skills that matches what you just heard from Amanda. And so I want to give you an example. First of all, it's very interesting that those people who come to an ACP enrollment event are exactly those who are the most digitally disadvantaged. 80% have an income that is under $40,000 a year. The majority don't speak English. Many come on a bus with all of their children so that they can get connected and have a shot at a computer in a drawing. What they also tell us is that the majority of those households who have children in school, their students, their children who are going to school, only about half have a 1-to-1 device ratio in school, and that less than a quarter have the benefit of a device coming home. And about 20% have never, as parents, been invited to a digital literacy training at the school. So here's a crosswalk, a connection back from this work group to the education work group. We see a similar pattern, by the way, with patients or members of health plans that are in the medically disadvantaged communities, and the federally qualified health centers trying to deliver services report that the majority of their clients or patients don't have devices at home to participate in telehealth. When we ask those people who have been at these in-person ACP enrollment events, how do you assess your level of digital literacy? 58% call themselves beginners. Furthermore, 62% want digital literacy training. So there's a pretty good example of now what we need to manage to and plan to be able to address. Furthermore, what we have in California as a goal set by the California Broadband Council is to get to 90% enrollment of ACP or in another affordable offer by 2024. Today in California, we have 5.8 million households who are eligible for ACP. That's a proxy for low-income households that really do need assistance. We know from experience that at least 20% of all those households need in-person assistance because of one reason or another. They might not have the paperwork initially. They don't have access to the internet at home. You have to enroll in ACP online. They'd have nowhere to go to get that assistance, may have a language barrier. And in that, so when we take the goal of getting everybody online, and it's 5.8 million households who qualify for ACP. Today, California has more households enrolled than any other state at 1.8 million. We still have a gap of 4 million households that at the very least need to get online with an affordable internet service. If 20% of them need assistance, that's 800,000 households that not only need to get connected to the internet, they need digital literacy training. So that's a good sort of management of the challenge, quantifying what we need to do. And it's essential, coming back to why digital equity, it's literally, as we call it, a 21st century civil right. It is impossible to function in the world today. To get a job, you have to apply online. If you are going to be able to, in the Inland Empire, as you heard from Amanda, in logistics, which that is one of our regions that specializes in logistics, 70% of the jobs that are not filled in the logistics industry in the Inland Empire is because they do not have sufficient digital literacy skills.
Thank
So
you.
I will close by saying you've got resources on the website for anybody who wants to see them, Laura.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you for sharing. I think sharing what we're seeing in some of these ACP events, enrollment events, what we're seeing in communities that are looking for access to affordable high-speed broadband really kind of leads us into our next section. So Fiona, if you could bring the slides back up, please. Thank you so much. So what we're going to do next, this is where we really want to have conversation and engagement and hear from all of you. So what we're looking for is what are the experiences that either you have had being disconnected from being able to connect with the digital world, or organizations that you're working with. So lived experiences, specifically from the historically disconnected communities and individuals. We talked about the 8 covered populations. Perhaps you're one of those populations and you want to share your experience. This is where we're really seeking engagement and input from the public. It's not simply going through the motions. So what we'd like to do now is kind of open it up for participants. If you guys can utilize the raise hand function, we're going to go to the next slide and take a look at what our conversation prompts are for this. The next slide, please. So again, this is kind of like our sharing and show and tell in a way, but we really want to hear from you. And again, I want to challenge you. We had a robust conversation in our education group yesterday, and we want to keep that going throughout all of these outcome area working groups. So I'm going to kind of combine the first 2 questions because it seems as though the one leads into the other, and it may be something that you may want to respond to as a 2-part answer. So what are and what have you seen as barriers to digital equity, either in your community or that you've faced directly? And what are ways that you or your community have found to help bridge that digital divide or find more equity in the digital world? We would love to hear some of those as examples. So if you can raise your hand, we will call in folks and have you unmute yourself. So I see Rebecca, and I'm going to ask you to unmute. There you go.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Can you guys hear me okay?
We can, and we're going to spotlight you in just a sec here.
Okay, I get a fancy spot.
Yep, there we go. We want to see you too.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I just want to give kudos to all of the different organizations and agencies that are involved in this space. And I appreciate the opportunity to be able to share. So for context, I am going to be speaking on behalf of my community that I work for here in the city of Long Beach. And I'm going to go ahead and drop in the chat here our digital inclusion roadmap, because essentially this highlights all of the work that we have been doing. And we were able to hear directly from community members that are most impacted by the digital divide. And I also want to give a spotlight to our community partners that are here on this call. We do have Braulio from the YMCA here, there. And then I also see Sean from Human IT. So thank you to our community partners that are joining us in this effort. So first and foremost, the biggest thing that we're seeing in Long Beach is high costs. And this is something new that perhaps you guys are obviously hearing from many different spaces. And I do want to echo the fact that even affordable low-cost options are a significant barrier for our communities in Long Beach. We have heard that even paying that may be low to some of us, like $10 a month, is still too much. So being able to continue to promote resources and services that are free is also going to be key. We've also heard from our community that language access continues to be a huge barrier. Most importantly, from our Cambodian residents. So we have the largest Cambodian community outside of Cambodia. And I would say we've done a really good job with providing resources and services in Spanish, but not in Khmer. So we really need to be very intentional with how we're providing those types of resources and services in a language that is familiar and languages that our residents are speaking, at home. We've also just had issues with just trust with the different institutions. So for example, we acknowledge that us as a government entity, we don't always have the trust and relationships with community because of systemic and institutional racism and oppression. So with all of that being said, we are relying primarily on our amazing community partners that are on the ground doing the work, that have the trust and relationships with community. And I would say that is what has been the most impactful and successful. And that transitions into your guys' next question, is really partnering with community-based organizations to get this work done. So we've been very fortunate enough to receive CARES Act and ARPA dollars, which we're calling Long Beach Recovery Act locally. And we are providing, direct funding and resources into our community-based organizations that are on the ground doing the work, who have the trust and who are able to reach communities most in need. And that by far has been the most successful way, because we're now able to bridge the gap between trust with government, trust with community, in partnership with these organizations that are ultimately elevating the work. I also want to underscore the importance of racial equity as part of this effort. So I want to just make sure that when we're looking at this, we're understanding that racial equity needs to be intertwined with this work. So really elevating our Black and Brown communities. And the good news about using a racial equity approach / lens is that it allows us to address other areas of marginalization. So we can look at income, we can look at zip code, and that will allow us to ensure that we're ultimately elevating communities that are most in need. So as we're looking at this process, like, how are we being very intentional with bringing community members as part of the decision-making process, making sure that our resources and services are available to them, and really just making sure that we're addressing any challenges or barriers as part of that process. So if we're going to be doing a community outreach event, are we being mindful of the time? Are we providing child watch if appropriate? Are we honoring the community members' time with, food and other ways to, really acknowledge their presence, and creating a space where they feel welcomed and we're not further perpetuating inequities that we're seeing in our system. So I can go on, but I just wanted to elevate those key things. And again, thank you so much for holding this space. And I did drop our roadmap in there, and I'm also going to drop the city's equity toolkit, because I feel like that could also be used perhaps as a best practice in this space as we're looking at things from an equity lens. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, and thank you for continuing to elevate the work and the feedback that you've had from the work that you've done there in Long Beach. I know you guys have had an incredible past few years of developing this, and then now seeing the outcome. So continue to hold us accountable. All right, Liza. Are you able to unmute yourself? Welcome.
Yes, I should be unmuted. Thank you for the opportunity and all the good information. I am Liza Massey. I'm the Chief Information Officer for Marin County, just north of San Francisco. We're about 250,000 population. Marin is a very wealthy county on the surface. but we have one of the largest disparities between wealth and poverty in the state of California. In our county, we have 11 cities, and so the county has to coordinate with those incorporated areas too. We created a broadband strategic plan a little over a year ago. We did that through basically my leadership. We don't have a broadband or digital equity office anywhere in the county or the cities. And so I did that with an all volunteer army from every sector, including education, business, healthcare, even our residents. We were able to get our plan in place, and part of that was a needs assessment that did include looking at digital access and equity, and not just in the digital literacy, but all aspects from devices, training, support, and encouraging adoption. And so that is the good part. We do work collaboratively and convene, but the downside of this is has not been, and I'm still fighting to get more attention and resources for broadband infrastructure deployment and digital equity. We and one other person are working very hard trying to do everything, looking at the FCC map. So we have a clearer information around where we have digital inequities. And Marin is rural on our coast. We are urban, and we have an urban core where we have two of our most diverse populations who also are more inclined to be in poverty and not have access. And then we're suburban. And so we have a variety of issues, not just rural, not just urban. And so that makes it more difficult. So like I said, our issues are around resources to coordinate and convene the efforts, which we have done a little bit, but there are a lot of holes because it's not. The second piece of that is really educating our leaders about the importance of broadband and getting funds allocated. We received $50 million in ARPA funding. I was only able to get $1 million, which, as you know, is a drop in the bucket, and it was treated like the biggest thing in the world toward broadband, and that's all of broadband. But we are fighting for right now the infrastructure dollars and being successful, but I'm really looking forward to opportunities to get funding for the digital equity piece. And then I would say what we really were successful at is convening and collaborating and getting everyone involved. We had third graders through 90-year-old residents, and then every sector in between working. We had over 100 people working toward getting our needs assessment and strategic plan together. And we had over 3,700 touch points around the community online. This was during COVID, online, but also in person with community members in our unserved and unconnected population. So I'm looking for any advice and really just getting support from outside to encourage and educate our local officials and others that broadband access is a big issue in Marin, despite the fact that we're considered a very wealthy area.
Thank you, Eliza. And also just wanted to say to everybody, like this, what we're trying to do also is create a community around all of this this work. And so learning from each other, sharing our experiences, and maybe somebody can step in and just say, hey, like, this is something that we did that might work for you. Just creating that network and creating that community and learning, what we have out there and what the barriers are. So thank you, Liza. And so I'm just going to say, if I mispronounce anybody's name, don't be shy about correcting me. So I'm going to say Sade, but I might be wrong. So please correct me if I am. Unmute yourself.
Yes, you are correct. Thank you very much. My name is Sade with BICE, which is the Parent Institute for Quality Education. As much as both Rebecca and Liza mentioned, I think the important aspect of what we need to see is really comprehending what's happening at the ground level. And during the pandemic, a lot of the work that was to support both the educational as well as the family's ability to connect. Our hope in working in collaboration with our families was to really glean all the stories and experiencing that was happening during the pandemic. And with that onset, we actually began to develop ways to support them, because we provide workshops in partnerships with schools. So we implemented digital literacy as well as skill sets to help them adopt any new structures that the school was providing to support them at the home, as well as making sure that they're accessing resources and any necessary support systems. But ultimately, what we were noticing is that not only was it a connectivity issue, an adoption issue, and an access issue, but it was also, as mentioned previously, was those trusted messengers. We are here in the Central Valley, have a monopoly of just one ISP or maybe two. And so oftentimes we don't really have a choice. And at the cost, whether it's low cost, sometimes we have 5 or 6 family members all trying to connect to this particular low cost connectivity, and it wasn't sufficient enough. So it is as if there was no access, even though our maps say that there is access. Oftentimes their access, as mentioned earlier, the connection was coming from just a smartphone. So really doing our community assessments and gleaning where the educational experiences of our families were at, to really understand at the ground level, okay, so now instead of just showing you how to connect, now the tools and understanding what is Wi-Fi, what is a hotspot, what is a Chromebook, like these, it was verbiage that was being communicated to them, but it was whether in English and Spanish or in their home language, there was actually no way to really comprehend what's actually happening. And so oftentimes that led to more barriers. And in collaboration with other community-based organizations, stakeholders, even ISP providers, we came together collaboratively to support the needs of our families. And that was coalition building, that was coming together to really understand and get a landscape of what's actually being out there and what's working, what's not working. And as I put in the chat, some of the things that we were doing has led to tremendous work in the infrastructure that's being provided for the Central Valley. So thanks to that collaborative work, we're able to begin at a level of making sure the infrastructure was there, but then also looking at the middle mile and the last mile to make sure that that pipeline of support was getting to the homes and the people that we're serving. But our organization didn't stop there. We're invested in the policy work that's being done as well. So making sure that we're at the table, making sure the experiences of our families is being heard, as well as anything that can be supporting them to advocate for themselves as well, which resulted in resident council members to really advocate and uplift the needs in relation to what's happening in the infrastructure. And I hope as conversations as such, the work that is being done collaboratively has gone much more in terms of supporting the needs. And I do feel as we continue to work and support the infrastructure, as well as the last part of making sure our families are getting educated without just providing just a simple device, will ultimately lead to a more equitable support system for our families across the state.
Thank you so much, Sade. Thank you also for really sharing some of the methodology and approach that you guys used in building that coalition and also the programs. And we're gonna touch on kind of, you know, some of the topics and things that have been shared here today. We'll touch on that in the next section. So I don't want to forget about that either. Alex, I see you have your hand up.
Hi, everyone. I echo a lot of what everyone said around leveraging trusted messengers. I'm a social worker. I'm chair of the Disabilities Commission in Santa Monica and lived experience. One thing that maybe I'll focus on number 3 is just access to assistive technologies. So not only do you need broadband, a computer, if you don't use a mouse or keyboard to navigate, you need additional things. And I think like the California broadband benefit's great, but it doesn't have access to that. There's also, so once you have broadband, digital spaces themselves could improve their accessibility. And I know there's new guidelines coming out, web content accessibility guidelines coming out in April. So that's kind of the floor. And I'm hoping digital spaces will go above that floor and become more accessible over time. Also, people in the community say they're kind of overwhelmed with all the information. So leveraging those trusted members to break it down into bite-sized pieces. I hear like the term infodemic, just so hard to find things yourself. So leveraging those and like we do monthly presentations on accessibility resources in the community, and we have like 5 bullet points. I often share the broadband benefit and other things out there. And then there's not a lot of digital literacy content around accessibility, how to use live captions, how to modify your smartphone windows so you can use it more accessibly. And I'd just love to see more content in that space. And then just with everything, it's involving people with disabilities early. When you're in the planning phase, it's a lot more inexpensive than once you get to development or production or deployment. It's more expensive, timely. So just getting folks, from the blind community, deaf, hard of hearing, mobility, people who don't use a mouse or keyboard early will save costs and make just a better, the digital curbside effect that when you make things accessible, it makes it better for everybody. And then just echoing a lot of things cost and leveraging community partners is key. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alex. We really appreciate that. And thank you for touching on kind of what we haven't gotten to. So the third question that we have for the group, I'm going to have Camila, who is our graduate student researcher, just ask that of the group.
Hi, everyone. Yes, so for the last question, we want to know if you can please share with us any reflections you might have about our discussion today, topics we have not mentioned, or anything digital equity in general.
Thank you, Camila. So this is where we really do need to hear from you. What are we missing? What do we need to include in future conversations? Lynette, I see you have your hand up. Hi, Lynette. Lynette, you're unmuted if you wanna talk. All right, we'll give it just a minute. Lynette, are you able to hear us? All right, well, hopefully she can come back and be able to join the group. But if there's anything that we have missed as we've gone through this, please feel free, raise your hand. I see some hands are coming up, put stuff in the chat. Let's go ahead and go with Jasmine. I'm going to unmute you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jasmine. I'm a policy and communications intern for the Children's Partnership. We're a children's health advocacy organization based in California. We're currently working on a digital equity brief, actually, surrounding different disparities that are centering children and different communities within California. And I think for us, a huge question would be how children are centered within your digital equity mission and within your digital equity program. We know that there's a lot of issues surrounding telehealth, for example, telehealth for children, different resources for children in communities of color and lower income communities, especially within cities and communities that are often overlooked because there is supposed to be more resources available within. So yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And just want to remind everybody that we have some other outcome area working groups too. I know that you've been touching on some of the other areas. So want to also encourage you to join like the education outcome area working group. We have a one for health, and we have essential services, accessibility, civic engagement, workforce, and tribal collaboration as well. So just wanted to kind of put that out there. I believe the name is Strat. If I've mispronounced, please correct me.
No, you're perfect. Thank you. Hello, thanks for the opportunity. My name's Strat Maloma. I'm with AARP, and we're always looking to represent the voice of the 50+ older adults and their families. And our focus is really education and outreach wherever we can. For our audience, really, the last couple of years, and even going back before that, the areas of health, isolation, jobs has really been something important as to why we really need to help expand or close the digital divide for them. Something that we've been doing is we've been doing teletown halls, reaching out to folks across the state to sort of inform them about funding options like the ACP, etc. But really what we found in those conversations that we've been having with the community about the ACP is just how shocked they are, the amount of eligibility criteria that's there for them. So I guess more information needs to be done around that for folks to know how they can qualify for the ACP and other programs. And then something else that I also noticed is, it really helps to do things like mailers to reach the unconnected folks who might not necessarily have a smartphone, might not necessarily have a computer. So that we found has sort of been helpful. But wanted to just end with, a thought in terms of, talking points or ways, or if anybody has suggestions, especially to reach those. LA has a large undocumented community, and those are folks we want to sort of build the trust with and provide the information to. Your earlier speaker who spoke about some of the sign up in-person events, those are kind of events that I think would really be helpful for folks to attend, but we do need to build that trust with them and have those kind of either talking points or language or maybe some best practices of how to reach those communities so that they are comfortable attending and trusting that, if they give the information to sign up for the ACP, that nothing else is going to happen to them except that they'll get access to broadband. So just wanted to share that. Happy to hear any thoughts or suggestions that folks have around that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I wanted to just ask a follow-up question really quick. You had mentioned trying to help some of the older adults enroll in ACP. Is it the sheer volume of requirements that is what's intimidating?
No, it's not that it's intimidating. It's that they were surprised to learn how many in how many ways they can qualify.
Oh, I get it. Okay, so how many ways?
It was a surprise to them.
Okay.
Absolutely,
okay,
yeah.
Got it. Thank you so much for clarifying that. I appreciate it and appreciate the comments very much as well.
Thank you.
And hopefully we've got some folks who can hear, who can connect with you as well. Again, build the community. Paul, I see you have your hand up.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Paul Goodman at the Center for Accessible Technology. I just really want to emphasize that digital adoption efforts, affordability efforts, all of those won't work for a community unless the community has control over that broadband access. So if we're going to democratize the internet, if we're going to democratize accessibility, then it's really important that communities own their own broadband infrastructure, and that should be part of the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Linda, you should be able to unmute.
Hi, my name is Linda Thomas, and I'm the Vice President at Cal.net. We have over $50 million of Connect America 2 funds to build out broadband infrastructure in rural counties in California. And I focus especially on the west side of the valley and those rural areas. And I just got the phone with the school district in one of the rural areas today, and they said that the problem that we run into, and I agree with this, is that people with ACP, when it comes to signing up for ACP, people are very leery of giving their information to the government. And I understand that. And so we work with school districts, we work with community-based organizations. We have information in people's language of choice so that they understand. And I think this is what Strat was talking about as well, that nothing else is going to happen to them if they sign up for ACP. And that's, people have to trust. And, we have ACP, we're also a Microsoft Airband partner, so we can provide devices, home devices to people through Microsoft for $10, a home computer. But again, people have to trust that nothing else is going to happen to them. And that's a difficult barrier to get over.
Thank you. And that's a really important one to continue to bring up. And I think as we get into the working group meetings a little bit further, I think the ACP adoption awareness and kind of best practices is going to become, is going to be a consistent topic. So, all right, I've got Lynette. Hopefully we're able to get you unmuted this time, Lynette.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
I don't know why my name is showing as Lynette, but she is my deputy director. My name is Alice Tyree, and I am the equity program manager for Caltrans District 7 here in Los Angeles, and we also cover the Ventura County. So I'm actually here to make sure that we as a community are able to work together hand in hand. When you think Caltrans, you think infrastructure. We are now building the next middle mile broadband on the System Highway. So this is synonym of building the next digital transportation system. So as such, we have to collaboratively work together and bring awareness to the public. What is digital equity? How can we make this internet and all the services that go together, as Ms. McPeak mentioned earlier, available to everybody out there? So we have Caltrans District 7 specifically. I have established a program called Learning Table, where I bring forth people from different backgrounds where we can actually discuss this, and including, community-based organization, what is needed on the ground, and how can we assist as state organizations. So I would like to partner up with you and everybody on the call to make sure that we are actually doing this together to achieve the greater good. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Digital transportation system, I like that. We are, as kind of leading into the next section, one of the things that we've heard here today was, I was just thinking of what Sade was talking about with the workshops that they've been developing. And so one of the things that we're looking at doing is taking kind of a statewide look and inventory of the programs and services and partners that are out there. And so I'm going to pass it over to Rich Navas with Broadband Equity Partnership, our advisor on all things broadband, to kind of go over what that looks like. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Next slide. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I've been listening to folks and reading the items in the chat, and just really thrilled to hear that there's so many wonderful programs going on across California. And you heard Scott Adams talk earlier about the state digital equity planning process. Part of the process requires a needs assessment. And to address this needs assessment, we've developed a tool called the Digital Equity Ecosystem Mapping Tool to conduct an asset inventory of all the existing programs, plans, and services being offered across the state of California. So next slide. A lot of the programs that you heard from Rebecca in Long Beach, from I think it's Liza in Marin, and from Peak, all of these are the types of programs and services that we want to capture using the DEEM tools. So I would highly encourage you to keep the conversations going and to at least alert us to what's going on in your own community, but to also participate formally by including these programs and services and plans in the digital equity ecosystem mapping tool that we intend to release in the coming weeks. The DEEM tool aims to answer what programs are being offered, where are they being offered, and to whom are they being offered. So by capturing this information, we hope to be able to get a better understanding of the digital equity ecosystem across California. It is imperative that you help the state of California understand exactly what's being offered in your community so that we can have a better grasp of where to allocate resources. This also helps organizations, entities, coalitions better position their programs for future funding when the NTIA capacity grants and competitive grants are released in the next year. Next slide. So who should participate in DEEM? If you leverage technology to offer any program or service, we want to hear from you. We want to know exactly what's happening in communities across California for program and service delivery, leveraging technology, leveraging broadband, or any internet access-based program. Next slide. In addition to the DEEM tool, we have to concurrently understand what's going on in California households. So the DEEM tool is aimed at program providers, organizations, coalitions, entities, funders. We have to concurrently then understand if California residents are experiencing barriers to digital equity. So we've developed the Digital Equity Public Survey to do exactly that, to address what California residents are experiencing in the household in terms of their access to the internet, affordability issues, programmatic issues. Are they able to access skills training in their communities, especially if they live in rural communities or limited English proficiency communities? Next slide. So we intend to develop this tool in partnership, or we've already developed a beta test of this tool. And I think Alex Elliott, that was on the call earlier, just brought up a good point of addressing this tool and anything that we create for digital equity to be able to be accessible to all communities, including communities that are disabled. So Alex, I'd love to be able to work with you after this call to be able to do some pre-testing with what we've developed so far for the Digital Equity Public Survey. We hope to release this public survey in the coming weeks, but we would love to be able to work with people like Alex Elliott to be able to understand if we have been comprehensive and inclusive enough in how we've developed this tool. We've already done some pre-testing with state agencies and with other communities in California, and we will be able to offer this tool in 12 languages to accommodate limited English proficiency communities. This tool, next slide, will be offered via an online survey and via a phone survey, and we will be releasing it and disseminating it in all 58 counties to oversample, especially for covered populations. So can we do a sneak peek of the tool? So this is an example of the public survey. These are some questions that we will be asking of California residents in 12 languages with audio included to accommodate those with visual impairments. So just to give you an idea, this is just some of what we might be asking our residents to help us understand how they use the internet on a daily basis. And then if you could just go to the DEEM tool. This is an example of what we will be asking you as providers, as practitioners, as organizations that provide programs and services to California residents. So just want you to get a good sense of what's coming. This will be released in the next couple of weeks. Please participate. Please push this out to your channel partners. Please share this with your constituents. Please encourage folks to complete these tools so that we can have a representative picture and understanding of what's going on with digital equity across California. And you can go back to the slide. Thank you. And next slide. And with that, I'm going to turn this off to Laura Sasaki. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Richna. So we've talked a lot about the process, different ways to get involved, and you know, Richna just shared a couple really critical and crucial ways to contribute to the process, but we have more. So we would love to have you sign up for updates on the Broadband for All portal, which is our website, and we'll be putting those links. Thank you, Camila. She put those links in the chat for you. We would love to have you attend our local events. We are still working out the timing and the schedule for that, but those will be available on our website as well. And then both completing the digital equity public survey yourself and also sharing it out with groups that you work with, friends, family. So it might seem like a strange thing, but if you talk to them about what you're learning here today and the impact that it could have on their lives, I would just highly encourage you to share that out and ask folks to contribute to that. So with that, let's talk a little bit about what our next steps are. I know we're at time, so I'm going to kind of wrap this up really quickly. Next slide. So the next steps for this working group will be to develop strategies that align with the priorities of the digital equity program that we've talked about here today. Take a look at the gap analysis. So essentially, what are we gathering as a result of the surveys that we talked about? And between what we've got and where we need to get to, where is that gap? And then taking all of that information and putting together some recommendations for the Department of Technology to be included in the final draft of the plan. So next slide. We've got 3 more meetings for this digital literacy and inclusion group, and that is in March. So how does digital inequity create disparities when it comes to digital equity and inclusion? And then we're skipping it to May. What digital equity programs are currently working well in your community and what's missing? And we'll be getting some of that information back with the DEEM tool that Richna talked about, but we want to hear more from you. And then in June, I'm using that data to help shape the priorities and the recommendations. So we'll be talking more about that in June. And next slide. This just gives us an idea of where we're at in the process. We're kind of about a third of the way in, and let's close out with the final slide here if we can. One more. If you want to get a hold of us, this is how you do it. We'll share these slides out. We can put the contact information in the chat, but we really thank you all for being here today with us. We hope to see you and more at our next meeting, and our next meeting is March 15th. It is at 11 as well, and it is on, I believe it's on Wednesday again. So thank you everyone for being here and participating. Please continue to think about what we've talked about here today. Reach out to us if you want to connect further. I know that we'll be following up with some of you based on what you've put into the chat. And again, we just thank everyone for joining us today. And please continue to be part of the process and encourage people to come and have their voices heard too, because we want to hear from all of the community members and folks that are being impacted by this, so that when we are addressing digital equity and the gaps and getting to digital equity, we're actually hearing from the people that we need to hear from. So thank you all very much, and I hope you have a fantastic day. We'll see you next time.